You know, that feeling you get, that little voice inside that tells you to do the right thing, even when it's hard, and even when nobody's looking? Or have you ever wondered where our modern ideas of universal human rights really come from? Well, today we're going to dive into the mind of a philosophical giant who laid the groundwork for so much of our world, Immanuel Kant.
Believe it or not, Kant's entire massive, complex system really comes down to answering these three questions. They look pretty simple, right? But his attempt to answer them, not just for himself, but for all of us, sparked a complete revolution in how we think about, well, everything.
And get this, the guy who changed the world, famously never really left his hometown. But his ideas? They went everywhere. See, back then, philosophy was totally deadlocked. You had two camps duking it out, the rationalists who said all knowledge comes from pure logic, and the empiricists who said, nope, it only comes from what you see and touch. Kant's grand project was to step into the ring and build a system that could finally bring them together.
So let's start with that first big one. What can we actually truly know? Kant's answer, which he laid out in his masterpiece, The Critique of Pure Reason, didn't just add to the conversation, it basically flipped the whole table over.
He called it his Copernican revolution, and that's not an exaggeration. Before Kant, the assumption was that our minds are kind of like passive cameras, just taking pictures of the world as it is. But Kant flipped that idea on its head. He said, no, our minds aren't passive recorders, they're active builders. The world we experience has to conform to the built-in operating system of our minds, things like our concepts of space, time, and causality, for us to even make sense of it at all.
Now, this idea has a fancy name, transcendental idealism, but the core concept is pretty straightforward. It splits reality in two. There's the world of phenomena, that's the world as it appears to us after it's been filtered and organized by our minds. And then there's the world of noumena, that's the world of things as they really are, in themselves. And here's the kicker, we can never know that world directly, ever. So we can know things for certain, but only about the world our minds have helped create.
And this is an absolutely brilliant move. By drawing a hard line and saying science can only study the phenomenal world, Kant built a kind of firewall. He protected all the big human questions, God, the soul, and most importantly, free will. He argued they exist in that unknowable noumenal realm, totally safe from the laws of cause and effect that govern the physical world.
And that leads us right to his second question. Okay, so if we are free, how are we supposed to act? Kant's answer here was just as radical. He said that morality has nothing to do with religion, or making people happy, or what the consequences are. It's based on one thing and one thing only, pure reason.
For Kant, the only thing in the entire universe that's good without any strings attached is a good will. A good will doesn't do the right thing to get a reward, or to look good, or to feel good. It does the right thing simply because it's the right thing to do. It acts from duty. The intention is everything.
So, how does reason tell us what to do? Kant says it gives us commands or imperatives. Now, most of these are hypothetical. You know, if you want to be healthy, then you ought to eat well. They depend on what you want. But morality, he says, is different. That's a categorical imperative. It's unconditional. It's not if you want to be a good person, then tell the truth. It's just tell the truth, period. No exceptions, no excuses.
Okay, so how do you figure out what that command is in any situation? Well, Kant gives us a handy two-part test. First, the universal law test. Ask yourself, could the personal rule I'm about to follow become a law for everybody on the planet? So if you're thinking of lying, what if everyone lied all the time? Well, trust would break down, and the very idea of a promise would become meaningless. So lying fails the test. Second, the humanity test. Are you treating people as people with their own goals and dignity? Or are you just using them as a tool to get what you want?
And here is where it all comes together so beautifully. That feeling of ought, that little voice of reason nagging you about your duty, that, for Kant, is the dead giveaway that we are free. Think about it. It would make absolutely no sense to say you ought to do something if you weren't actually able to choose to do it. Our morality is the very proof of our freedom.
Okay, let's zoom out to that final question. If individual people can use reason to be moral, can entire societies, can humanity? Kant thought so. He took his whole ethical system and applied it to politics, sketching out a vision for how we could achieve lasting global peace.
He literally wrote a blueprint for it in his essay Perpetual Peace. He broke it down logically. First, you have the preliminary articles. These are the things we have to stop doing right now to even have a chance, like getting rid of huge standing armies that just make everyone nervous. Then you have the definitive articles. This is the positive foundation we need to build for a peace that actually lasts.
And that foundation rests on three main pillars. First, states need to be republican, meaning they have representative governments where the citizens have a voice. Kant's logic was simple. If the very people who have to fight, die, and pay for wars are the ones who get to vote on them, we'd have a whole lot fewer wars. Makes sense. Second, these free states should join a voluntary federation, a sort of league of nations, for collective security. And third, a principle of universal hospitality. Everyone has a right to visit another country and not be treated as an enemy.
But here's where this grand vision of universal dignity hits a wall, a huge, deeply troubling wall within Kant's own work. We absolutely have to talk about the jarring contradiction between his universal philosophy and what he himself wrote about race.
Yeah, those are his words. For much of his career, Kant wasn't just a passive product of his time, he was an active architect of scientific racism. He created these elaborate racial hierarchies, arguing that non-white races were fundamentally inferior.
So what on earth do we do with that? How can the same mind produce the categorical imperative, this idea that every single person has an inherent dignity, and also that? It's a massive paradox, and scholars are still fiercely debating it. Does this poison the well? Does it undermine his entire system? It forces us to engage with his legacy with a much more critical lens.
And yet, even with this profound and undeniable failing, his impact is just immense. In so many ways, he truly is the architect of our modern thought.
He basically set the terms of debate for philosophy for the next 200 years. The two major schools of thought today, analytic and continental, both start by responding to Kant. He gave us the secular, reason-based foundation for our modern ideas of human rights. And his political vision is still a cornerstone of how we think about international relations.
So all this leaves us with a final, really challenging question to chew on. Kant bet everything on the power of pure reason. He saw it as this flawless, universal tool that could unlock truth for everyone. But his own racism shows us that his own reason had a colossal blind spot, and it makes you ask a difficult question. What if reason, the very tool we rely on for truth, isn't as pure as we hope? What if it's always, in some way, shaped and warped by the prejudices of the person who's using it?